George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
A biblical massacre is about to take place in the Palestinian town of Rafah on the Egyptian border, where 1.9 million souls are crammed into a town with a population normally of fewer than 150,000 people. It is perhaps the last straw that will make the world wake up, or will it? And free Nelson Mandela. He was freed from 27 years of incarceration in the dungeons of apartheid on this day. And as predicted here last week, ImranKhan has won the general election in Pakistan from inside a prison cell. And little Hind becomes the emblem of Palestinian suffering. It's going to be a bumpy night, so fasten your seatbelts. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
TuckerCarlson broke the internet this week. More than 200 million people in English watched the interview with President Vladimir Putin. I was ridiculed last Wednesday when I predicted that it would reach 150 million. It's 200 million, but if you add in the different language groups into which it has been translated, including, of course, Chinese, then the number may very well be close to 1 billion people. It is the most watched interview in recorded history. And there's a reason for that. TuckerCarlson, yes, had the courage to go ahead and do the interview, do his job, do what a television journalist is supposed to do. Let other people hear the other side of the story. But also because Vladimir Putin, as I told you last week, would come across as neither Vlad the Bad or Vlad the Mad. His history lesson, his erudition, his grasp of the facts and the details in a 2-hour interview when the President of the United States would be unable to concentrate for a 2-minute interview was a stark contrast and emblematic of the difference in the quality of leadership of the two rival powers, Russia and the United States of America, which is in such a parlous place right now that Hillary Clinton is dusting down her presidential robes, hoping to have another go against Donald Trump, because it is self-evident now that after the finding of the Justice Department in the United States that Joe Biden could not be prosecuted for breaches of the Documents Act because he was senile with a poor grasp of memory and with an avuncular style that might disarm any potential jury. When the president of your country can't be prosecuted because he's senile, you've got a problem. And the Democrats now know that on top of all the other problems, Joe Biden can't win in November, and they might be better throwing someone else into the mix. And Piers Morgan, the poor man's TuckerCarlson, he got the sack again from Rupert Murdoch again. And Talk TV, our rival, is fading into obscurity. Murdoch has announced that he is scaling back the tremendous loss-making investment that he has made in Talk TV. Without Piers Morgan, Talk TV doesn't exist, and soon it won't exist at all. Piers Morgan once told me, after I myself was sacked by the same Rupert Murdoch, that a sacking is an opportunity. So I want to extend to him this opportunity. He can come and join me on the mother of all talk shows as a guest, two-headed panel presentation team, and we will at least make sure that he's exposed to larger numbers of viewers than he has been of late on the ailing, failing Talk TV. I just heard my editor and indeed my director fainting at that offer, and I'm sure that they're praying that Piers Morgan will not take it up. But I mean it quite sincerely, folks. I'd like to grill Piers Morgan in the way that he grilled so many other people, reducing them to tears, breaking them, as he taunted and ridiculed them for views which are actually the mainstream views outside of the bubble of Talk TV. So come and have a go, Piers, if you think you're hard enough. Nelson Mandela was my leader as an undercover agent of the African National Congress in apartheid South Africa. I was proud, am proud. It was one of the proudest things I've done in my life to go underground for the ANC in the last days of apartheid. Virtually no one else on the left in British politics had ever even set foot in apartheid South Africa. But I travelled its length and breadth and left my blood on the floor of the Guguletu police station in Cape Town, South Africa, just a few miles away, maybe 2 miles away from Paulsmoor Hospital, where Mandela was then incarcerated. For illness, yes, but mainly so that the apartheid regime could conduct more easily the negotiations with him that led to the abolition of the apartheid state. Apartheid South Africa had no right to exist. No state has a right to exist. The USSR, the Soviet Union, had no right to exist, and now it doesn't exist at all. Czechoslovakia had no right to exist. Nazi Germany had no right to exist. No political construct called a state has a right to exist. It will exist until it doesn't. And that brings me, of course, to the extraordinary situation that we now face, even after almost 130 days of genocide. We may be on the brink of the greatest act of genocide in modern times. The Israeli armed forces, having remobilized their reservists, are besieging the town of Rafah, which I know so well, the gateway from Egypt into the Gaza Strip, where stretches out hundreds of kilometers of trucks full of aid unable to gain access. And on the other side of a simple gate, there are 1.9 million Palestinians, refugees, displaced again, refugees over and over again, whose tents and shacks and even living on the ground, even living on the cold earth into which they might soon be laid, are 1.9 million Palestinians. Netanyahu has given the green light to the military plan to launch an attack on Rafah. If it happens, if the world doesn't stop it, then nothing that we have seen so far, and we have seen so plenty, will be anything like the carnage that we're going to see. Imagine a town of 150,000 people. Imagine 1.9 million people now living in it, being subjected to a full-scale, no-holds-barred military assault by the terrifying child murderers of the Israel occupation force. It is almost impossible to imagine. But after all that you have seen over this last 128 days, you must at least be able to imagine what it is going to look like. Icy rain is falling on Rafah. The streets are afloat with water and with bodies. The streets of Gaza may soon be running with the blood of hundreds of thousands of people. Now, David Cameron is concerned about it. So is Anthony Blinken, exactly the same word, concerned about it. Joe Biden is concerned about it. And again, he briefs that his relations with Netanyahu have reached an all-time low. And he has asked Netanyahu not to launch this genocidal assault on all those people in Rafah. But of course, Biden's in a position that he doesn't have to ask. He can tell, because Israel is afloat on dollars sent by the United States of America. All the weapons that will be used in the assault were given gratis by the United States of America. The intelligence overflights over Gaza are flown by the United Kingdom out of our apparently sovereign base in Cyprus. The Western allies of Israel are jointly and severally culpable for whatever happens next, just as they are responsible, complicit, as collaborators in what has happened so far. They will not survive it, I predict you. The kind of carnage that we may be about any minute to witness will bring down governments, and it will bring down leaders of the so-called opposition in Western countries that are in fact merely a part of an ironclad consensus between front benches everywhere, all for Israel, all for Netanyahu, all for Zionism. Zionism, which this week in an employment tribunal was found to be the ideology that most of us said it was, and not a religion. Professor David Miller won his case to establish that anti-Zionism is a protected characteristic under British law. No one can be dismissed from their job for being an anti-Zionist. It seems likely that no one should lawfully be able to be expelled from a political party for it either, although hundreds of thousands of people in Britain have so been expelled, suspended, but only if you're those or such as those. Only where it suits will you pay the price of anti-Zionism, of hostility to Israel and its governing political system. David Miller's victory is a landmark judgment. That's why they're already burning the midnight oil to change British law to try and overturn the verdict of the tribunal. But there's not enough time left in this Parliament for that to happen. And so everyone watching, in Britain at least, should know that the things they've been chanting, that the views they've been expressing, that the feelings they have inside of them are entirely lawful, and no one can stop them from expressing them. The situation in the rest of the Gaza Strip reached perhaps its apex this week. Every so often in a conflict, like when I brought little Mariam Hamza back from Iraq to Britain for treatment for leukemia, becomes an emblem of a much wider issue, of a much bigger cause. And a new emblem arose in Palestine this week. This little girl, Hind, aged 6 years old, was traveling with her family in a car when the Israeli occupation force began firing on the car. They killed the adults first, and then they killed Hind's sister when she was on the telephone telling the Red Crescent Society, the Palestinian Red Cross, of where they were and what was happening to them. The sister then was killed, leaving this 6-year-old girl alive in a car with her slain family, her slaughtered family, lying beside her. And the audio, when she took the phone, will live forever. The audio in which she describes, a 6-year-old girl describes, that they are under fire, that her family are all dead, as she begs the ambulance to come and take her, to come and rescue her. The ambulance coordinated through the hotline which they have with the occupation force to say that they were going to pick up the little girl. And when they got there, the same Israeli killers murdered the two ambulance men who had arrived to pick up the little girl before murdering her. This girl had funny ears, funny glasses, funny toys, a cheeky smile, just like my daughter's, just like yours, just like your granddaughter's, and now she's dead. And worse, she was killed in unbelievable scenes of cruelty, of viciousness, of evil, an evil that would not be more evil or less evil than the evil of the executioners in the death camps of the Holocaust in the Second World War. They willfully murdered this little girl. They willfully murdered the ambulance men that came to save her. They knew what they were doing. They are now asleep, or perhaps haunted and unable to sleep by the cold-blooded act of murder of a small child. And we have to remember this little girl every time we're asked to boycott McDonald's, boycott Starbucks, boycott Labour, which has supported this carnage, this genocide throughout. We have to remember the face of that little girl if ever we feel our resolve is weakening to do everything, anything in our power to come to the aid of the other little girls and little boys and their mothers and fathers, grandparents and their siblings and their uncles and their aunts who have not been killed yet. Hind will live forever in our minds, I pray to God, just like little Faris O'Day did, the boy throwing the stone at the tank in previous iterations of this catastrophe. Think Hind. Think always of Hind. Think of her in that car with all her dead family around her. Think of the terror. Think of the fear, horror that she experienced. And think of this. Aged 6, this little girl lived every single day of her life under siege. And her last breaths were breaths of absolute terror and horror. She lived in fear all of her life and died in scenes of unimaginable horror. We don't know at what point they killed her. We must now hope that she was killed quickly, that she was not left in the car with her festering family and then executed later when it suited the killers to do so. Perhaps when she was beginning to become an icon, the Anne Frank of the Palestinian population in Gaza, whose memory, whose face would haunt people for generations to come. Now, last week, our show was entitled, Can Imran Win? Well, he won, all right. The rightful Prime Minister of Pakistan, ImranKhan, illegally, unlawfully removed from power by an American organized coup d'etat because he said absolutely not to American demands that he turn Pakistan once again into a base camp for America's attacks and America's subversion of Pakistan's neighbors, was overthrown, has been sent to prison for more than 20 years, whose wife has been sent to prison, whose party men and women have been killed, disappeared, imprisoned, their wives, mothers, sisters disappeared, beaten and tortured in a conservative Islamic society, their head coverings torn from their heads, their position as women, grievously undermined with long-term consequences for all of them. Imran Khan's party was banned, his symbol taken off the ballot paper. Imran was disqualified from standing. They jailed, they stopped people filing nomination papers. One candidate who was huckled by the dictatorship in Pakistan, his mother stepped forward to be the candidate in his stead, and she won. They all won. Imran Khan's candidates, standing as independents, swept the boards in a pre-rigged, then rigged, and post-rigged election. Imran Khan's victory was so overwhelming, so complete, that even the tyrants in power in Pakistan could not deny it. There's only one way out of this impasse. Free Imran Khan, like Mandela was freed. Free Imran Khan. Reinstate him Prime Minister of Pakistan. I promise you, this is going to be a bumpy night. It is the mother of all talk shows.
A new dawn has broken, has it not?
He had that Clinton thing. His eyes were round and big and smiley, and he was very charming.
He became this incredible pop idol kind of prime minister.
I think most people who have dealt with me think I'm a pretty straight sort of guy, and I am.
New Labour was backed by the most powerful media interests because they realised he was representing them.
He was caught red-handed trading policy in return for hard cash from a businessman.
America has no truer friend than Great Britain.
Both Bush as well as Tony Blair are now wanting to plunge the world into a holocaust.
JP Morgan paid him off for the Iraq war. The man is a war criminal.
Is Tony Blair a war criminal? In my opinion, yes.
Most definitely.
The pursuit of money has become the dominant theme in your life.
All these relationships are, in most people's estimation, corrupt relationships.
No previous Labour Prime Minister has behaved in this shameful, money-grubbing way.
How do you sleep at night? You know, it's that. It's as a person.
Now, you get that film free along with my other film, Killing Kelly, if you follow me on Patreon, patreon.com. Please follow me at the end of this show, patreon.com/George Galloway. It will cost you less than the price of a cup of tea per week in an insalubrious cafe, and I hope you think I'm worth it. We've got a poll running. Is Piers Morgan the poor person's TuckerCarlson? You can vote on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway, on my Twitter, on the YouTube community poll, and on the YouTube stream. And if you are watching on the YouTube stream or on Facebook or any other platform that allows you to share, please share it now with all of your friends and contacts. 15,000 people have already voted in this poll. The telephone numbers through which you can respond to anything you've heard here or wished you'd heard here. If you're in the US or Canada, it's toll free, and the number is +1 844 944 3344. If you're in the UK or Ireland, equally free of charge, it is 08081 965522, and the worldwide number is 0044 203 966 2625. Let's take some calls. It's Matt in Portland, USA, on the Putin interview. Up first. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you, George. I wanted to mention that I've listened, like the Gray Zone and other people talk about the interview.
And I noticed something. Tucker came in there hoping to, gotcha on Putin, but the way Putin did this, he controlled the narrative, like especially when it came to China. And you go back and watch Fox News in the past where Tucker had talked about China. He had this anti-China stance on it, and Putin shut it down and said, no, we have a shared border with China, and we've had a long-standing working relationship with them. And you could see it on Tucker's face. It absolutely, he was he didn't understand what was going on. That's why he put that thing at the beginning, because Putin controlled the entire history of Ukraine and, telling about how most of it was all part of Russia. It was, and then he didn't bring up Gaza because this was all about Ukraine, Russia, he brought up about the coup that was done in 2014 by Obama, and how when the people went to protest what was going on, it was the Nazis who run the government now attacked these people, along with, it turned out, Israeli soldiers who were also sent in and murdered these people, massacred them. They never stood. And then, of course, the media lied and said these people were violent and they were, fighting a legitimate, government, which they were not fighting them. And that's why Oliver Stone doing that documentary called Ukraine on Fire, where you sit down and talk to Putin and they reveal the coup and everything. And Putin said he didn't like the coup, but he was willing to work with the government. But the history of the America saying we're not going to come towards Russia, we're not coming towards Mikhail Gorbachev, of course, the lies they kept saying. This is why he had to go in, because he had no choice. They didn't want to go in. He wanted to leave this country alone, but they forced his hand. Russians fear more of having their country taken apart and having their stuff stolen than free speech, any of that stuff, because they constantly get told, and they do pay attention to the West, we're going to go and we're going to overthrow their government, we're going to steal their resource. They say the same thing about China. That's what these two countries are working together. Look, Taiwan just had their elections, and it was revealed that the guy that's now, America, guy who's the president, the people that wanted to vote for the other party were prevented from voting. America once again interfered in other people's elections to get the result they wanted, but then they sit there and say when Putin gets elected, or Xi, or any of these other leaders get elected, they go, oh, they're rigged elections. It's ridiculous. Our elections are not fair.
Yeah,
the Electoral College is
it's ridiculous. Of course, it is. No, thank you, Matt. That was quite a tour de horizon, and I'm grateful to you for it. The nostrum that the United States doesn't interfere in other people's elections died a long time ago. The idea that the United States is not up to its neck in interfering in other people's affairs is patently obvious for anyone with two brain cells to rub together. Even in the British general election, when Jeremy Corbyn was the leader of the Labour Party, when there was a possibility that a Labour government that was not a slavish follower of the United States of America's war after war after war might come to power, Mike Pompeo made very clear in recorded remarks that he would ensure that Corbyn ran the gauntlet. And, of course, he didn't get far enough. Thanks for the call. Lance is in Canada on Piers Morgan. Go ahead, Lance.
Okay. Piers Morgan, if we want to call him mainstream, the one thing I can say is you're right. He attacked people and he badgered people with other than mainstream media opinions. But the one thing I noticed is that he dared to have them on. Like he had that, I forget his name, that Palestinian doctor who was shot while treating patients. He had Jackson Hinkle on. Like he actually had a lot of the people on. And so they did actually get a chance, whereas almost nowhere else they did get a chance at all. And I think that, he did his job because his bosses are paying him to dismantle these people. But he actually had these people on where nobody else did. So in some ways, I think Piers Morgan did a lot of good because, I mean, some of the people he had on now, I know who they are and I follow them. I don't know. I think he would be great sitting at the desk next to you myself.
Yeah. Well, the offers there, Lance, and he can take it up or not. I don't think he's got that many options left to him now. He's been sacked from just about every broadcaster and every publishing house in England. So why not come on the global University of the Airwaves? Timothy Gibbons says, wasn't it interesting how Putin revealed he knew Tucker had applied to join the CIA? It was indeed, I didn't know that. But then Putin's former KGB, so he probably knows a lot more about the CIA than the CIA know about him. Does anyone think the CIA would have rejected Tucker? Well, I don't know. I mean, I have serious disagreements with TuckerCarlson on any number of matters. But he strikes me as a person far too honest to prosper in the CIA. Jessica McFarlane says Piers Morgan is nowhere near Tucker for either rich or poor. Never watch him now. Okay, the poll is here. Have your say. Is Piers Morgan the poor person's TuckerCarlson? We used to say the poor man's TuckerCarlson. I guess we're not allowed to say that anymore. Manchester in England, Natalie on UK politics. Go ahead, Natalie.
Hi, George. It's just a question, really. Looking at the state of kind of US and UK politics at the moment, obviously there's the US election coming up, which is a choice between Biden, who doesn't seem to know what planet is on half the time, and then obviously Trump. Looks like it's going to be that way. And then to look at the UK, which will be between Conservatives, which obviously are responsible for what's going on Gaza at the moment, and between Labour, it's more the question of which one do we choose between, because neither of them are really the parties that are representing the people at the moment. It's like it's going to have to choose between the best of a bad bunch. So what's your opinion on when it comes to voting in the next election?
Well, neither of those could be described as the best of a bad bunch. I've never subscribed to the lesser of two evils theorem, because that way evil always wins, and the center of gravity of the evil tilts ever further to more and more evilness. So I never agreed with that idea. But if that were not so, it is simply impossible to argue that Joe Biden is the lesser of two evils in the United States of America. It's not possible to be even more evil than he is. He's the greater of two evils. There are other candidates that you should vote for in the United States. If I were there, I'd be voting for my good friend, Dr. Jill Stein of the Green Party USA, not to be confused with the Green Party anywhere else, at least not under Jill Stein's leadership. And there are plenty of people that you can vote for in Britain. My own party, the Workers' Party of Britain, will be fielding candidates in up to 50 constituencies. And we're looking for candidates now, if you're interested, Natalie. Anyone who's interested in being a candidate for the Workers' Party in the parliamentary election later this year should contact us urgently. And we'll see after interview whether you're the right person to stand in one of those up to 50 constituencies. But there are also independents standing everywhere. I met one today who's standing in Tameside against Angela Runner, as they now call her, because she does a runner every time she actually has to be confronted or seen even by one of her constituents, running away from her genocidal record over this last period. There'll be independents standing, one I know, in Bethnal Green and Bow. There'll be independents in the London Borough of Newham. There'll be Workers' Party and independent candidates standing in Birmingham. I think there'll be independents in Bolton, independents in Oldham, all over this region. If I win the by-election on the 29th in Rochdale, there'll be plenty of independents standing here for the council seats in May and the following May and the following May. There's a change going on inside British politics. When I was young, 88% of the people in this country voted either Conservative or Labour. Now that number is fewer than 50% and falling like, and in this upcoming general election, it will be the smallest percentage ever to vote either Conservative or Labour. For me, Conservative and Labour are two cheeks of the same backside. Neither can be described as prettier, more attractive, more efficacious than the other. They're just an arse, a collective arse. Two of them, exactly the same. And if you ask me, in Britain, Keir Starmer is without doubt the greater of two evils. He'd lead us into more wars. He'd lead us into more misery. He'd lead us into more division in the country, even than the twerp, the inky-fingered clerk of empire currently sitting in 10 Downing Street. Thank you for that call. I'm cutting you short only because we have a terrific guest, a man that many of you know from all the social media platforms. Many of you have read his books. His father was a general in the Israeli army, a signatory of the Israeli Declaration of Independence. My guest also served in the Israeli occupation army. But he regrets it now, and he has emerged over many decades now into one of the most effective critics of Zionism, of Israel, and its successive leadership. He's an author and an activist. Please welcome Miko Peled. Miko, welcome back to the mother of all talk shows. If you don't mind, we'll start with the most urgent of all the urgent questions now facing us. Netanyahu is besieging Rafah, and a scene of unimaginable carnage may be stretched out before us. What's going to happen there, in your view?
Well, it's always good to be in a chat with you, George, so thank you for having me on the show again. Look, I think Netanyahu made it absolutely clear he rejected a very measured and reasonable offer by the Palestinians in Gaza for a ceasefire and the release of the hostages, making it clear once again that all he's interested in really is the genocide, the ongoing massacre. It's time for the international community to step in. It's time to demand an embargo on weapons to Israel. It's time to demand a blockade on Israel. It's time to demand the unconditional release of all Palestinian prisoners and a no-fly zone over Gaza. That has to be the bare minimum. Nothing less than that should be even accepted as an offer. And until the state of Israel is willing to stop the killing, release the prisoners, allocate the billions of dollars that are needed in order to rehabilitate and rebuild Gaza, until such time, it should be treated as a pariah. There should be no diplomatic relations. There should be no trade relations. Israel should be kicked out of FIFA and the Olympic Committee and everywhere else. And that's it. They made it absolutely clear. They do not want a ceasefire. They want to keep killing at any cost. Well, it's time for the international community to say, well, here is the cost. If you will continue this genocide, there will be a cost. And the first measure must be an embargo on weapons. Not a single weapon, not a single piece of ammunition should be allowed to be sold to the state of Israel. And if anybody does sell them, they should be penalized. That's where this needs to go.
Now, the Prime Minister, the President, the Secretary of State, the Secretary General of the United Nations have all said they're concerned about what's going to happen. That's a bit like saying you're concerned about what is about to happen in the death camps of the Holocaust. What do you mean you're concerned? What are you going to do about it? Are they going to do anything?
Look, I think the comparison you made is right. I mean, once again, people are being rounded up and massacred, and the world is looking the other way. I mean, it happened to the Jews during the Holocaust. It's happening to Palestinians now, and the world is looking the other way. It will happen when the constituents demand it. People are protesting. There's no clear demand. People are talking about Palestine on the streets, but there are no clear demands. Ceasefire is not a clear demand. Ending genocide is not a clear demand. Embargo on weapons is a clear demand. A blockade of Israel, a naval blockade, is a clear demand. Stopping all flights, all commercial flights, is a clear demand. And of course, immediate lifting of the siege on Gaza and release of all Palestinian prisoners, these are clear demands. Allocating billions to rehabilitate and rebuild and provide humanitarian care for the people in Gaza, these are clear demands. We need to demand of our elected officials that that they enact these policies. We have to demand it. They're not going to do it on their own. Very few politicians will do the right thing unless they're forced to do it. And so this is what needs to happen. Anybody who cares for Palestine needs to stop hiding. We need to stop talking clearly and honestly. The state of Israel has got to be punished in the most severe way, or else there won't be any change.
An analogy I heard once has stayed with me, that a surgeon cannot operate on his own foot. To imagine that this is going to be resolved by Israeli politicians, an internal political realignment, is fanciful. That somebody else has to operate on this infected foot that we might compare to Israel. And they're going to have to do so forcefully. Do you sense any sign yet that anybody anywhere in the world is ready to do that?
No, unfortunately not. But it's not only that nobody's willing to do that, this is not even part of the conversation. Just like the safety and security, guaranteeing the safety, security, and the lives of Palestinians is not part of the conversation. What are we doing? What are we talking about? There is no guarantee. We see these stories, these children, these mothers, these people being massacred, being killed by snipers, being killed by one-ton bombs every single day, and nobody speaks up. There is no guarantee. There is no one providing safety, no one even talking about the need to provide safety and security for Palestinians, never mind life for the Palestinians. Enough is enough. So not only is it does not seem realistic that it will happen, no one is even talking about it. And that's not even being demanded. I don't know what the negotiations are like behind the scenes between the Palestinians and all these different groups negotiating. But it's time. Netanyahu made it clear. He said no. He said no to a ceasefire. He said no to releasing of the hostages. We know, you and I knew this before, but in case anybody had any doubts, we know now he wants to continue the killing as freely and as for as long as he desires. And he needs to be stopped. Israel needs to be stopped. And like you said, it makes no difference if he's prime minister or some other genocidal maniac is prime minister, because they all at the end of the day have the same policies. And we've seen this going back for decades. You probably more than anybody know this. So it's time to raise the level of demands. We need to stop treating Palestinians like their life is cheap, like they are meaningless. That's what the world is doing now. They're letting them die by the tens of thousands as though there's nothing. And they're still arguing whether Hamas is a terrorist organization, whether we should condemn the Palestinians. This is complete nonsense of a conversation. There needs to be severe action immediately against the state of Israel and immediate help for the Palestinians unconditionally. Unconditionally. The state of Israel, there have to be punitive measures put in place immediately right now, and Israel needs to start acting unconditionally. This has gone beyond too far, far, far beyond too far.
There are negotiations. They are periodically restarted and broken off. But Netanyahu has a vested interest in their failure, doesn't he? Because almost certainly the first casualty of peace would be him. He'd fall from power right into the dock and probably behind bars.
Well, I could live with that. I can certainly live with that. I don't think that's a bad thing. But you're right. He's bound because his right flank, these maniacal settlers that are, in his government, they're the ones who are keeping him in power. And he does not want to, he doesn't want to disrupt their, he doesn't want to disrupt anything because he doesn't want to lose their support, and they're demanding more killing and so on. But it shouldn't be up to him. It should be forced in a way that it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't matter who the prime minister is. There needs to be a forced agreement, a forced ceasefire, but not just a ceasefire, an elimination of the danger for Palestinians forever, not a temporary stop of the killing of Palestinians, an elimination of the danger, an absolute guarantee for the safety and security of Palestinian lives, moving from now on forever. That needs to be the conversation.
Yes, quite so. A ceasefire is necessary but not sufficient. You and I have lived through many ceasefires, only for the fire to resume again. You could set your alarm. You set your alarm clock by it. I've had to lead convoys into Gaza to break the siege. I mean, roughly every 2-3 years. So a ceasefire, whilst of course is a necessary precondition, but if it's only a ceasefire, it's meaningless. It's got to be an end to the occupation. It's got to be an end to the agony of the Palestinian people, a permanent end. I want to ask you about something. I don't know if you're placed to answer it. I said in my monologue that this little girl, Hind, who was murdered in her family's car, along with all of her family members and the ambulance drivers that tried to reach her and save her, a 6-year-old girl. She's become emblematic around the world. I'm just wondering if you know if she made any impact on Israeli public opinion, if anyone paused for a moment and thought that that little girl could be theirs.
If that was a possibility, there would have been this would have happened many dead children ago. Was it a year or two ago? They shot little Muhammad Tamimi, a 2-year-old, in his car with his father in the village of Nabi Saleh. This beautiful young boy, 2-year-old boy. I mean, if there was a moment where Israelis could be moved, that moment would have been, like I said, many dead children ago. It's not working. It's not happening. It is not happening. And you can hear it, you can see it in the Israeli press, you see it in the, in all the other media outlets that support Israel, in the way they justify this genocide and this brutality and cruelty, heartless, cold brutality. It's not showing anywhere. I'm not seeing any such demand to stop the killing, any such heartfelt empathy with the Palestinians. I don't hear it or see it anywhere. And again, how many young children have we seen? How many pictures have we seen of children who are massacred like this over the years? I mean, it's horrifying to think about it, but it's not happening. It's not making a dent.
It is making a dent in the United States, though, isn't it, Miko? 50% of Biden's own supporters believe that Israel is committing genocide, and another 20% were unsure about that. This is beginning to make a significant impact on American politics, isn't it? Unfortunately, we've got Zion Don on one side and Genocide Joe on the other of the two likely presidential hopefuls.
Yes, I heard earlier before I came on you talking about Jill Stein, who is a good friend of mine too, and I support her completely. And I think she's the only candidate that has a message that would resonate with what is happening right now. She's the only one that, number one, has some sense of empathy for what is happening, and provides a real option to the policies of the United States. And so I would really hope that people who are disenfranchised and, like you and I, do not believe in the lesser of two evils because they're both evil, would opt to vote for her. And I think a strong show for her would be a clear message to it would change the way American politics are or politics happens in America. I think it's very, very important to have a voice that has a clear progressive agenda when it comes to Palestine and is clearly anti-Zionist. I don't know that we've ever seen this in America. And Jill is, she's a high profile. People recognize her, people know her. She's been in the press. She's very well spoken. So I'm really hoping that this will push people to put her name at the top of the ticket to, if nothing else, send a clear message that is no longer business as usual.
Finally, here, this is a $64,000 question. We used to call it when that was a very great deal of money, Miko. We know why the governments of Western countries, including virtually all of the European countries, support Israel. It's part of an imperial system. Israel is a key part of the armory, of the order of battle, of the empire. But why do all opposition parties also support them? You'd think that they, at least, even if just because they see how many millions are on the streets, that they would lean a little and be more proactive, more empathetic to the suffering of the Palestinians. But in virtually every Western country, the opposition party is as supportive of what's happening as the government party. How do you figure that out? Go figure, as you Americans like to say.
Well, I would argue two things on this. I would offer two things. The first one is the fact that the Zionists have, as you've well known, have been investing in all political parties, on all political platforms for over 100 years. They've been working with Labour, with the Tories, with any government, any opposition, any party that any politician that even has some, minimal possibility of ever being in power, they've been investing in them. So they don't care about that. So they've been doing it very effectively. And the other side is that we have been absent. In other words, we have not yet managed to close the gap between public opinion on Palestine and the people who make policy on Palestine in the halls of power. It hasn't happened in America. It's not happening in Europe or in the UK yet. And that's on us as constituents. We need to be present. We need to push and fill that gap that exists and has existed for a very long time between public opinion and the policymakers. And it's up to us because they're not going to do it on their own. So I think those are two reasons why you see it doesn't matter which party is in power, you're going to see support for Israel either way.
Miko Peled, thank you for your wisdom as always. Thanks for joining us on the Mother of All Talk Shows. The poll, 16,221 people have voted. Is Piers Morgan the poor person's TuckerCarlson? Well, it's kind of vaguely equal. Let me have your point of view before the end of the show. MK76 says Miko Peled was on James Whale's show last night. He rightly called James and Ash clowns. And Michael Mundy says, you're on the money, Miko. It's decades overdue and now must be forced by the international community. Full stop. Period. Line 1, Sean in Leicester on that very subject. Tucker and Piers. Go ahead, Sean.
Hello, George. How are we doing?
Hi. All good, thanks.
I got up on Friday morning to sit with a cup of coffee, or should I say 2 cups of coffee, and listen to an interview which obviously was for a man who's got brain cancer. Vladimir Putin is very on point, I thought. It was quite
not just brain cancer, Sean. Every organ in his body is riddled with cancer. In fact, he's already dead. That was one of his many body doubles that was being interviewed. They must educate people well in Russia.
He didn't look a day over 50 to me. He looked quite good.
Exactly.
He asked a question on that interview, and I also have a question in relation to that question that he asked. And he said that Russia would have had no war in the Ukraine after they reached negotiation time to speak to him. And he said, other than that, the only person that scuppered it was the UK Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. And there would have been no war. It would have been finished by now. Now, he asked, where is he? And I thought, well, we know where he's at. He's on GP News and he's putting out videos asking people to sign up because he's going to, according to him. He's ready for war. He's Lieutenant Johnson. He's nearly 70 years old. And
he'd make a big he'd make a big target, wouldn't he?
Yeah, he's as fat as a pig. There's absolutely no uniform he's going to get into, that's for sure. But I've got a question about that as well. I'd like to know not just where he is. I'd like to know where all these cronies are who told us to save the NHS, the Nazim Nahawis of the world. I'd like to know where Savage Javid is. I'd like to know where Matt Hancock is. I'd like to know all the people that stood on a night on the TV and told us that famous three-word slogan, save the NHS. Very much like the McDonald's advert, you know, ba-da-ba-ba-ba, I'm loving it. You know, where are these people now? Why aren't those people as well being held to account?
Well, they're in the Sean. They're in the counting house, counting their money. The revolving door between government and big business, the very big business that when they were in government they did everything to feather their nests, is now a British national institution. And it's our bad luck that our leaders are becoming younger and younger. I don't know what age you are, but you sound middle-aged at least. Not as old as me, but not as young as you'd like to be. In those days, Sean, gone by, people left politics as Prime Minister, Chancellor, Foreign Secretary and so on, and retired to their garden and to write a memoir and maybe a novelette or a light operetta. But now they're younger when they're in power, and we have to suffer them making money out of what they did or didn't do in power for decades. We're looking at them getting richer and richer and richer on our backs. And they don't even bother to hide it anymore. They're no sooner out of the Ministry of Defence than they're on the board of an arms company. Little Ben Wallace, who, as you may recall, ran away from a debate with me at the Oxford Union. I was reviewing that speech again just the other night. He literally walked out of the MOD onto the board of not one but several arms contractors, military industrial complex companies. And this is the norm now. So normal that nobody even bothers to comment on it. Great call, Sean. Much obliged to you. Coming up after the break, we've got Hassan Chami, a Lebanese social media warrior of the first rank. He's also a pharmacist, an entrepreneur, but above all, he's an activist for Palestine. He's really worth hearing. Hassan Chami, coming up after this short break. Thank you. Go ahead.
During your show in the past, you've often mentioned that Donald Trump would be a much better alternative than Biden, although you weren't a big fan of him, etc. And you said that in all likeliness, if he gets in power, he'll be much more appeasing towards Putin. There'll be less likely of the conflict to escalate. But I have to tell you, I'm not so sure about that. Really, I think the only way to solve all this, it doesn't matter if Kenny gets in or anyone else, because there's always going to be, at one stage of our lifetime, two psychotic leaders of the superpowers. Why hasn't anyone in your show or yourself mentioned anything about nuclear disarmament or CND? Surely the only way to save humanity is by nuclear disarmament. And I just wanted to see what you thought about that.
Yeah, well, of course, but how are you going to get that? I mean, does CND even still exist? They could have been leafleting outside every cinema showing Oppenheimer. But of course, they don't have enough people to fill a telephone box. It is the worst example I know of, although the Stop the War Coalition runs it close, of an organization that for its sectarian, internal, political reasons has thrown away its brand. I have not appeared on a Stop the War platform for an entire decade. Not to worry, no to NATO, no to war. Its rival organization attracts exponentially larger numbers of people. They cannot help themselves, these people. These members of leftist groupuscles have it in their DNA that they cannot get along with anybody who isn't exactly like them. And as the number of people who are exactly like them is mercifully tiny, they end up in tiny organizations. So, of course, I'm in favor of the destruction of nuclear weapons. But how are you going to get that? It's a totally utopian slogan to advance at this point in time. I'm just trying to stop the weapons from being used.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Hassan Chami joins us from Detroit, USA, Motor City. As I said, he's a Lebanese pharmacist and entrepreneur, but he's become famous around the world for his social media advocacy, for haq, for justice, for the people of Palestine. I'm glad to say, looking in fine fettle, Hassan joins me now. Hassan, I was asking Miko Peled earlier, or making the point to him rather, that the issue of what's happening in Gaza, happening in Palestine, is finally beginning to have some traction in the United States public opinion. If you'd told me when I started out on this battle more than 50 years ago that the day would come when most Americans would agree with me rather than agree with Israel, I would never have believed you. And if you look at the polling amongst Joe Biden's support base, a very clear majority of people not only disagrees with what Biden is doing with Israel in Gaza, but half the people who voted for Joe Biden last time believe that Israel is committing genocide. What has brought about this tremendous change?
Well, George, I want to thank you for having me on the show. We love you out here in Dearborn, Michigan. We remember your 2006 legendary interview with Sky News during the 2006 war with Israel and Lebanon. So thank you for having me. But,
thank you.
You know,
welcome.
Here in Dearborn, you know, we grew up attending protests since the 90s, the 80s. I was born in 89, but in my childhood, my father took me to all the protests against the Israeli aggression on Lebanon and Palestine. And I don't think my father saw the light at the end of the tunnel. But today, now as we go to these protests in 2023 and 2024, due to social media and due to the narrative not being able to be tightly controlled by mainstream media anymore, Israel and their war crimes have been exposed, and we finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. The public opinion, not only in America, but all over the world has changed. So we see millions of people all over social media and coming out and protest all from every inch of the earth supporting the Palestinians, and it's a great sight to see.
It is. I've spoken actually more than once in Dearborn. I love it dearly. Please give my salam to anyone who's met me there. It's crucial for a Democrat to win the state of Michigan. And I would have thought at this point in time, I've got a better chance of winning the state of Michigan in November than Joe Biden. And I'm not even on the ballot.
That is true. You do, you know. So right now, what we're doing out here in Michigan is Michigan is one of 3 states in the country that has an uncommitted section on the ballot. So they're pushing a campaign to have all Muslims and anyone who supports the Palestinian cause and all minorities to vote uncommitted on the Democratic section of the ticket on February 27th. And the strategy is to show the minorities, to give, the Muslims and the Arabs and all minorities the hope that we can control the elections in Michigan. Michigan is a swing state, and we probably can't elect a president, but we sure as hell can, have one of the front runners lose an election. So if we get over 15% of people voting uncommitted, that gives us a lot of power, and that's a strategy right now.
They've tried hard to win you back. They've sent Biden. I think he announced that he'd placed sanctions on 2 settlers in the West Bank. He must think you're cheap. Are they still trying, or have they given up?
Yeah, this past week, they showed up to Dearborn to try to talk to, politicians and leaders in the Dearborn and Metro Detroit area. But they crossed the red line. No one's going to vote for Biden. Setting up sanctions on settlers means absolutely nothing. The Democrats have hijacked the Muslim community specifically for way too long post 9/11. And all they did was point their fingers at the Republicans and say, well, they hate you. We're going to protect you. And they haven't protected us. Even during the Obama time, if you see all the wars and all the bombs dropped by Obama himself, the Democrats have never protected the Middle East or the Muslims and Arabs. And finally, because of this war, I feel like everyone's starting to wake up to this. So Joe Biden and his team, Genocide Joe, Butcher Biden, has crossed the red line, and he won't be winning in November in Michigan.
The number of, Obama bombed, I think, 7 different Muslim countries in his 2 terms, including killing American citizens, by the way, without due process, and then killing the son of one of the American citizens in a subsequent droning. We droned a lot of folks, he might have said or crooned in his tan suit. He was, of course, no friend of Arab Americans, of Muslim Americans, and certainly not Arabs and Muslims abroad. But if you look at Biden now, Biden has actually bombed, he's bombed Gaza, at least his bombs were used. He's himself bombed Lebanon and Syria and Iraq and Yemen. And it's only February. It's not even the middle of February. That's quite a record of Arab blood spilled by a Democratic president that said he was going to protect you.
Yeah, Biden's definitely not going to protect us. You see, it's funny. They try to bomb Yemen and go to war with Yemen because they're blocking the Red Sea, and they haven't killed anyone. But why are they allowing Israel to continue their aggression? So the Israelis, the illegal state of Israel, has killed and bombed and is committing genocide and ethnically cleansing the Palestinians, yet you continue to fund them. But when the Yemenis block the Red Sea just to try to stop the war, you want to kill and bomb them. Quite hypocritical if you ask me.
Now, what's the reason for the success of independent broadcasters, social media analysts, pundits like you? You're a very handsome guy. You've got a great voice. Is that it? Or are the people just now more sensitized to the message? Or is it both?
I think it's people are sensitized to the message. There's myself and many others that are a lot better than me that we're just speaking truth. We're speaking truth. We're speaking from the heart. We're not scripted. We're very passionate in our beliefs because we are standing with light. As Netanyahu says, there's light versus darkness. Well, we are the light and Israel's the darkness. Netanyahu is the darkness. And so when we go out on social media and we speak with truth, with so much passion, it just catches it gravitates to the hearts of the listeners. And so that's all it is.
Yeah, light and darkness. I think he was foolish to initiate that metaphor because nothing could be more clear than that they represent the heart of darkness. Nowhere more so than in the deliberate, I was going to say indiscriminate, but it isn't indiscriminate. It's deliberate. A deliberate slaughter of children, deliberate slaughter of women who might have children, go on to have children or more children, the deliberate slaughter of doctors and writers and poets and intellectuals, the decapitation strategy of Palestinian society. The purpose is clear, isn't it? It's a genocidal purpose of ethnic cleansing. They're in Rafah for a reason, aren't they? They're in Rafah because next stop is the Sinai Desert, and that's where Israel really wants them, isn't it?
Absolutely. This is ethnically cleansing. They are ethnically cleansing the Palestinians. They've been exposed throughout social media, and the world sees it. If Israel and Palestine were labeled X and Y, and you just listed, under each one, the history, the entire world would support Y, which is Palestine. But because of Israel and politics and the Zionist movement from the late 1890s and the evil and greed for money, they support Israel. But you take out the names and you just list what these two people or countries have gone through, and I know for a fact the world will support Palestine.
Now, when I was in Dearborn, it's the first time, only time in my life, when all the cops were on our side in these issues. Is that still the case? Is the cause really dominant, hegemonic in the Detroit area?
Dearborn is a blessing. We have a great mayor named Mayor Abdullah Hamoud, who's one of us, young 32-year-old, 33-year-old mayor, good friend of mine. The Dearborn police, unbelievable, amazing cops in the city that protect us. And, a lot of the immigrants in Dearborn came here in the 1970s. My mother and father left Lebanon during the Civil War in the 1970s, came to Dearborn, and a couple years after, Israel invaded Lebanon and occupied it for over 20 years. So the people of Dearborn, the politicians, the cops, they know what we've been through and what we fight for, and we stand with truth, and they support us and they protect us at all costs.
It's the only place in the world I've been where the police queue up for selfies with me. It was a remarkable experience. How can people support your work, Hassan? Where can they find you?
I'm just on Instagram and Twitter. My Instagram is Hassan Chami, 1 with an underscore. I'm just out here putting videos to promote truth, to promote the Palestinian cause, to promote unity amongst all faiths, all people, brown, white, Muslim, Christian. If you see, when you study this war between Israel and Palestine, which you can't even call it a war, they try to paint it as a Jewish versus Muslim war, but it's not Jews versus Muslims because there are Palestinian Christians who are being affected. But the media doesn't want to talk about the Christians for a reason. So this is not just Jews versus Muslims. This is Zionism against the world. This is terrorism against the world. And so support, follow my Instagram and along with many others, support the videos, share them, and let's spread truth around the world.
Well, you spoke very important words there. Not only is it not us against Jews, there are growing numbers of Jews who are identifying with us. Miko Peled, that was on just before you, is a veteran of that. But we've now got a whole generation of American Jews, a substantial number of whom, a substantial proportion of which are identifying with the cause of justice. As Malcolm X said, I believe in justice, no matter who it's for, no matter who it's against. That's the spirit, isn't it?
It's the humanitarian spirit. You must stand up for truth. You must stand against falsehood, right? It is, as humans, we can sense what is right and what is wrong. And I continue to stand up against Zionism, because Zionism is the cancer to the world. It's the cancer to the Middle East. And as long as there's a Zionist government in the Middle East, there will never be peace.
Hassan, you're a credit to your parents and your people. Give them my salam. And I'm sure you'll get a lot more new followers after this appearance this evening. Hassan Chami, thank you very much for being on the
Thank you, George. Appreciate it.
Shows. Is Piers Morgan the poor person's TuckerCarlson? Well, it's actually quite interesting. Here's the results so far. You've still got about half an hour to vote. Is Piers Morgan the poor person's TuckerCarlson? Yes, say 56% on Telegram, 44% no. Yes, say 71% on Twitter, 29% no. Yes say 68% on the YouTube community, 32% no, and yes say 60% on the YouTube stream, and 40% no. Not overwhelming. I wonder if that means that, like an earlier caller, you think we've been a little too mean with Piers Morgan, or whether you think that Tucker Carlson is so much in a higher orbit than Piers Morgan that they don't deserve to appear on the same ballot paper. That would be interesting. Give me your comments on that. If you're in the US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. If you're in the UK or Ireland, 08 081 965522. If you're in the rest of the world, 44203 966 2625. Now, Kung Hei Fa Choi, it's Chinese New Year. Happy New Year to all our many Chinese friends, viewers, and well-wishers. Here's something I made earlier. Well, sorry about that. We wanted to show you what I had prepared earlier. Prepared it quite a few weeks ago, actually, for release on Chinese New Year. We've lost it. We'll come back to it. So here's the next phone call. It's the legend, the Professor Simon in Florida. Simon, what have you got cooking for us this evening?
Hello there, Mr. Galloway. It's a pleasure to be with you once again, and I'm able to speak with your worldwide audience. And there is obviously a lot going on, and I think by far the most impending doom, without any fear of exaggeration, is, of course, the situation in Rafah. And I believe it should be pointed out that one of the Israeli newspapers has actually reported that that plan for the operation was actually on Netanyahu's desk 3 weeks ago, and that the IDF has been waiting for the green light for 2 weeks now. And so even though it's only gone into the public domain in the last couple of days, and obviously triggered a great deal of pushback, including a request from Saudi Arabia for an emergency United Nations Security Council meeting on Monday, it would appear that the scheme is indeed well advanced. Now, it's just been reported, whilst you've been on air with your first two excellent guests, that President Biden has spoken in whatever manner one might imagine of him able to be doing so with the Prime Minister of Israel. And supposedly the conversation mainly focused on a last-minute attempt to try and arrange for a hostage release. And to that end, apparently, the head of the American CIA is being sent to Egypt in 2 days. But the Egyptians have actually moved up a whole battalion of their very, very old M60, that's literally the Patton tank originating from 1960, up against the border with Rafah. And obviously, I'm sure most of your audience will be aware that there's far in excess of 1 million people who have actually been moved into that area, plus the original inhabitants. Now, Netanyahu, who was doing the TV circuit in America, where, funnily enough, the word genocide was not used by any of the American hosts. Clearly, they haven't learned anything from TuckerCarlson, it would seem. But they did ask him if the people were to be moved in the nicest and friendliest kind of way, where did he, in his mind, other dastardly schemes aside, intend that they might go. And he explained that now that the IDF had finished their operations in the north of the Gaza Strip, then it would be perfectly possible for them to all move there. So it asked people just to imagine 1.5 million people on a death march, which is essentially what it would be, in their weakened state, many of them wounded, with no water and no humanitarian supplies getting to them, going to a scene that resembles the surface of the moon, without food and without water, no sanitation and no shelter for an indefinite period of time. And I would suggest that even in the most kindly of prepared civilian displacement operations, that would not be an ideal location for 1 million plus people. So that's the first thing that I would like people to be thinking about.
But Simon, yeah, sure, Simon, let me interrupt you. The notion then, presumably, is that the 1.5 million would go on the death march, but the resistance fighters would remain behind, would not try to join the 1.5 million who were headed northwards. I mean, they're treating us like fools, aren't they? This so-called command and control center. It's been everywhere, hasn't it? It's been in Gaza City, it's been in Khan Yunis, it's been under hospitals, it's been under the UNRWA, and now we're asked to believe it's in Rafah, where they sent 1.5 million people to avoid being slaughtered in the battles for the previous venues. It's all moonshine, isn't it?
Your English audience will appreciate this the most, that obviously, whilst Doctor Who isn't being broadcast and the TARDIS is available for Hamas use, and so that's possibly what is occurring. But without being facetious, one fears that they will filter out and using enhanced techniques, interrogate all of the male population before they're allowed to go anywhere. So I suspect that's the screening process that we'll use. But the other thing, if I may, for the benefit of you and your German colleague, Peter, on Wednesday, is tomorrow the pre-conference report for the Munich Security Conference, which itself is due to start and will last for 3 days, commencing on Friday of this week coming, is going to come out. And they're already announcing all of the very high-profile speakers who will be there. And indeed, the number 2 senator of the Democratic Party in the U.S. Senate, which in extraordinary circumstances is meeting over the weekend, trying to jam through the $110 billion killing spree aid. They are supposed to be on recess for the next 2 weeks, part of which many of them were going to spend in Munich. And it'll be interesting to see whether or not the new Israeli foreign minister turns up. The previous one did last year. And if indeed a senior representative of the Chinese does in fact turn up. But there were a lot of very, very significant announcements last year, including the new German defense minister saying that they were going to break the taboo for sending Bundeswehr German military forces to countries that had previously been occupied by Nazi forces, and hence they had never returned. And he announced that in the form of the mechanized brigade going to Lithuania, that because of their very poor readiness has still not occurred in full. But Dick Durbin actually said on the floor of the U.S. Senate that they had to get the aid budget, the money for Taiwan and for Israel and for Ukraine, at least through the Senate by next weekend. Otherwise, they'd all be deeply embarrassed at the Munich Security Conference. So we'll have the pre-conference report, which you'll be able to refer to should you choose to do so, or your German colleague on Wednesday. And then by Sunday, we'll be towards the tail end of that, because it's going to occur on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. It will be not televised per se, but available to watch on YouTube and Twitter. And very important things tend to happen there. It's extraordinary when they're amongst a group of very sympathetic listeners, the kind of things that you would think would be highly classified, that they tend to blurt out. And people have to bear in mind this is in advance of the 75th NATO annual summit due to happen in Washington in July. So that's one impending doom and one insight into what the globalists are up to in Munich this coming weekend.
Before I let you go, Simon, because we have a mutual interest in it, and many of our viewers do, as we predicted in the title of last week's show, ImranKhan has done it from inside the prison cell. What happens next?
Well, Mr. Galloway, the thing for people to look at there, and I'm sure your frequent guest Adil Raja could explain even more eloquently than myself, is the issue about the fraudulent Form 45. So the Form 45 is the result for each individual polling station within a constituency, like the one that you're so ably running for, I understand, later on this month in Rochdale. Okay. And imagine each church and each school and each community centre having a vote, and they get a few thousand votes, and that count is actually done locally. The boxes aren't transported. And then that local result is put on a Form 45. That gets sent to the constituency returning officer. He then literally adds up all the Form 45s and publishes them on what's called Form 47. And that is essentially the official result that gets transmitted to the National Election Commission of Pakistan. And somehow between the Form 45s being created at each individual location and them being published in the form of the Form 47, massive misdoing has occurred. And I personally have the belief that whatever number is being currently ascribed to these series of PTI-backed candidates who had to stand as independents because the party was essentially banned after the May 9th disturbances last year, he should have got somewhere between 180 and 200 seats, and they've officially given him 101, which allows the coalition of the other parties to still outnumber him in the Pakistan National Parliament. And the very key thing is that 60 of the seats are what are called on reserve lists. But those 60 seats, the one would have thought ImranKhan would get half of, because even after the theft, he's got half of the non-reserve seats, and the seats that aren't reserved for non-Muslim minorities. He's not entitled officially to any of those because his candidates are standing as independents, not members of a party. So because they're not an official party, they don't get a share of the 60 reserved seats. So he could end up losing another 38 seats just on that allocation as well. And it's not going to be nearly enough to form a minority government. So unfortunately, I'm very fearful for the final outcome in Pakistan as well. Though it seems undoubted that he won somewhere between 180 and 200 seats were the results to have been tabulated correctly. It is possible to go back and audit those. It's just a question of whether or not the provincial high courts and the National Supreme Court are willing to do that and go against the army and the Pakistani establishment.
Professor, a tour de force. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, as always, on the mother of all talk shows. Let's see. Yeah, we've got the Chinese New Year video now. Let's play it. Chinese New Year on February 10 will see the dawn of the Year of the Long, better known in the English-speaking world as the iconic Chinese dragon. And the dragon is a powerful thing. The Western media often use the imagery of the fire-spewing dragon to project a hostile image of China. So don't be surprised to see top Western media outlets resorting to similar dragon headlines and caricatures to perpetuate a biased narrative against Beijing in the Year of the Long. Why, we have already seen The Economist featuring on its cover a Chinese dragon breathing fire on the earth with the title screaming, "The World's Worst Polluter." This claim ignores the fact that the US and European nations have historically been the biggest emitters since the Industrial Revolution, and conveniently hides the per capita numbers, which puts Chinese emissions way below much of the developed West. Meanwhile, there have also been lectures in the Western academic corridors with titles such as The Chinese Dragon and the Yellow Peril, reeking racist undertones. These prejudiced narratives involving the dragon caricature in the Western media and political academic discourse contrast with China's actual contributions and initiatives fostering global cooperation and development, in stark contradiction to the negative imagery associated with the dragon metaphor. Many Western leaders have tried to stop the continuous rise of the dragon over the last 75 years, but all have failed. Modern China, with its mixed economy under socialist leadership, has swept all before it. The sun has risen in the east. In Rudyard Kipling's words,
like thunder out of China across the bay.
And it has lit up not just the road to Mandalay. China's Belt and Road Initiative is paving the way to prosperity all over the world. Roads, railways, and aviation are forging ahead in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and even in the Middle East. According to official figures, two-way investment between China and the over 130 countries that are involved in the BRI totaled more than $380 billion between 2013 and 2022, among which China's outward direct investment exceeded $240 billion. It is a new kind of long or dragon, seeking neither dominion nor subjugation, but cooperation and the philosophy of win-win. While China's adversaries deliver lectures, orders, threats, and invasions, China delivers airports, high-speed rail links, 6-lane highways, and rising prosperity. While others foment war, sending the horsemen of the apocalypse to ride roughshod over millions of lives, China brokers peace, reconciliation, and harmony. The Chinese economy is set fair, with rising life expectancy, standards of health, and educational attainment, and stands atop all happiness indexes as her rivals sink into a slough of despond. A good comparator is the United Kingdom, which last year named China as its biggest threat. No government in the whole world is less popular with its own citizens than that of Britain. No developed economy perches more precariously on the precipice. No G7 country is more divided, with national institutions more hollowed out. Like Don Quixote, the British government tilts at foreign windmills, which are a figment of its imagination. Whether through derangement or deliberate displacement activity, who can tell? But it makes no difference. The more China advances, the more the UK falls behind, and none can see it more clearly than the British people themselves. The long, otherwise known as the dragon, is rising, leaping, bounding, and Rishi Sunak sure isn't anybody's idea of St. George. Lots of messages and calls coming in. Prank says, I'm sorry, but the question asked about Piers Morgan was at best invidious. It makes no sense. Piers Morgan is irrelevant. Harsh, but maybe true. Cleopatra SLL says Putin of Russia gave an excellent background of Russian history, heritage, etc. It was necessary to bring us all forward to now and the issue between the Russians and the Ukrainians in this conflict. And Putin's shirt says it was Nelson Mandela who said that the apartheid in Israel was much worse than in South Africa because the Africans weren't being constantly bombed on top of everything else. And Ksenia Lis says we can't vote for those who support Israel. UK, please don't. Joseph's on the line in Wales on Putin. It's the Global University of the Airwaves. Go ahead, Joseph.
Hi, George. Great to be on the mother of all talk shows.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Make the point, George, about this comparison between Piers Morgan and TuckerCarlson. TuckerCarlson very much is one of the few journalists we have left, I believe, of integrity. And, well, he's a real journalist in the true sense of the word. His goal is to seek the truth, is to ask, the questions to get to the truth. Whereas most, I'd say, journalists now, if you work for the BBC or Fox News, as Tucker did, they're career journalists. And Tucker was fired from Fox News for his integrity because he didn't toe the party line in regards to subjects like the vaccine and, other numerous subjects. But Tucker, as a result, left Fox News. He got fired from Fox. And now, on his own, he's more popular than any career journalist. And he's landed this bombshell interview with Putin. And he's being criticized. I just saw on the BBC the other day, he's appeasing Putin. He's appeasing the Russian president. He's being attacked by journalists out of what I would say is jealousy. It just comes down to jealousy, I think, George. Because I'm sure you experienced this when you were a member of Parliament. You were an MP with integrity, with... it was over the Iraq War you got chucked out of the Labour Party, is that right?
Yes. Yes, it's hard to maintain integrity when treachery is all around you. But here I stand, I can do no other. That's always been my motto. Last word to you, Joseph.
Thank you, George. Yes, my last point as well was there's not just attacks on Tucker over this interview, but on President Putin himself over his long discussion, explanation of Russian history. I just wanted to point out, Russia as a country has existed for over 1,000 years. Something Americans, with their history only going back 250 years, don't understand. The Russian people's identity is formed by their great history and their recent history of persecution under communism of 70 years in last century. They suffered greatly under communism, something Americans don't understand. And I think that's something that even Tucker didn't really understand in this interview, was the necessity to explain that this Russian identity, which it's a kind of incomprehensible, isn't it?
Okay, thanks, Joseph. We're losing you. Thanks for the call from Wales. Damien Hugh says Piers and Tucker shouldn't even be mentioned in the same breath. Tucker is a journalist. Eastern Quinox 9324 says Tucker has evolved from what Piers currently is. They used to be the same until Tucker decided that the world deserves the truth. And Tom Joad says, can you imagine any Western leader as erudite, intelligent, or calmly in control as Putin? He ain't mad or bad, but he is head and shoulders above the dregs in the West. There's just nobody who was being honest could dispute that. My good wife is in the building, not right here in the room, but in the building at least with the social media roundup. We're in Rochdale, Gayatri. We're busy all day. Did you get a chance even to look at the social media?
Hardly. I'm just catching up with everything. But before anything, I want to please wish you all a happy Chinese New Year. Gong Xi Fa Choi. The actual translation for it, may you be prosperous. There you go.
Okay. May we be prosperous.
Right. So regarding the poll, I get a sense, the tweet that I'm about to read out, and I get a sense that most people think this way. This is from Peter Pan, and he says, what have the poor people done to deserve that? Why are you offering Piers Morgan him as for the poor people? And in the same vein, we have an email from Eric Benthoff in Albany, New York, who says, TuckerCarlson is far more likely to empathize with the poor person than Piers Morgan, and therefore Piers is the rich person's Tucker.
Well, I don't know. I mean, Tucker is the most successful journalist and broadcaster in the history of the world. That's something to be. There are a lot of people who look down their nose at the general public, but the general public have voted with their feet or their fingers to watch Tucker Carlson's output. 200 million people have watched that interview, and I don't know, it must be well over 1 billion people have watched his output on X already before this interview. And that's because he has a style of broadcasting, and he has the courage to interview people that the mainstream media would never interview because they prefer censorship over full exposure, the interplay of ideas, letting 1,000 flowers bloom, letting 100 schools of thought contend. I get the feeling that Tucker believes in all that. In that sense, he's a very old-fashioned conservative. He's not one of these neoliberal, neocon, new conservatives that actually believe in choking the life out of the other schools of thought. He genuinely seems to enjoy the interplay of ideas and people and things. And so he's also very good at it. He's not boring at all. I mean, I watch his output on things that I know nothing about and care nothing about, but I just like to watch the interviews. So it's entertainment, it's education, it's courage. Isn't that a fine thing?
It's wonderful, and I truly enjoyed those 2 hours of him interviewing President Putin. It was primetime television, and it was tuning into the television like never before, really. Long time since that happened, as we are all living on Netflix and all these live streaming software and subscriptions. So it was wonderful, wonderful. Now, I have an email here, and it is obviously early this week. I don't know if you remember, we had a clip of Joe Biden going out demanding the presidency of Mexico to open the Egyptian border. Who knew? Who knew Mexico was so nearby? So he says, hey, George, so Biden said he asked President Sisi of Mexico to open the Egyptian border. Whilst we may think it's just another Biden gaffe, I believe it could possibly be more sinister. I believe that Egypt will open the border, leaving no more Palestinians in Palestine. And so the Zionist wanting of a greater Israel would have been achieved, and Biden can turn around and say he helped save Palestinians. Finally, should the impeachment find Biden guilty, he has the perfect defense of having impaired memory. Stay safe and keep doing what you're doing. From Wayne.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Shorter roundup than normal, both because we were late to get to it because of our work and because of the hour. Thank you very much. See you shortly. Sean XK8 says, for the next poll, maybe ask, should Piers Morgan appear on MOATS? Yes, no. You will see how unpopular Morgan is. David Marston says, is Piers Morgan the poor person's TuckerCarlson? Is Piers Morgan on a Ukrainian hit list? No, indeed, no. Back to the lines then. Wayne is in Cheshire on UK politics. Go ahead, Wayne.
Hello, it's a privilege to be speaking to a living legend. Right, very
Thank
strange.
you so much. Most kind.
Very strange situation yesterday. I had a knock at the door yesterday lunchtime, and my son and I answered the door, and it was the Labour Party posse. We had the candidate for MP, we had councillors there, the usual. And they said, they said they're changing the constituency line, so we're coming round and we're also, to tell you that, and we're also electioneering. And I thought it was a bit early, but maybe they know something we don't. Anyway, so they said, are you on the list for being a Labour Party member? Which I was, the whole family were. And they said, I presume you vote in Labour. And I says, no. And they said, well, you down as a member? I says, no, I gave it up a while ago. And they said, can we ask you why? And I said, because of the Palestinian situation. And they said, well, what about it? I says, well, Keir Starmer has not asked for a proper ceasefire. He refuses to ask for weapons and arms, etc., to be sent there. He was on the radio show asking for electricity, gas and water to be shut off. And they said, well, that's not true. And I said, they said, where did you get this information from? I said, I got the information from watching the debates on the parliamentary programme live in the House of Commons. And he said, I'm sorry, but you're wrong. And I said, no, I'm sorry, you're wrong. I said, and then it got a bit heated, and I said, to be honest with you, and they all stood there, I said, you shouldn't be going around people's houses on basic lying. Anyway, so then he pulls a Conservative information sheet out. So you might as well have that then. I said, well, why would I want a Conservative one? And he said, well, if you don't vote Labour, you're giving your vote to Conservatives. I said, no, I won't. I said, if the Workers' Party stands around here in Cheshire, I'll be voting for them. And he said, well, they're no use. I says, well, George Galloway's standing soon on the 29th in Rochdale. I said, and I think he's going to wipe the floor with Labour. He said, I'll tell you what, I'll do you a £10 bet. So I said, go on then. So he says, I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Okay, very good. Well, you'll get a better odds at the bookmakers. Only just. I'm 7-4 right now on Ladbrokes, which is less than 2-1. We were 16-1 last Friday, so the odds are closing very, very rapidly. What a very interesting altercation. Thanks for that. Knights Table 4 says Basil Fawlty as a Labour leader and Norman Wisdom as the Prime Minister. What choices are we left with? Both sides bringing shame on our country. You might need to be British to get that, but it's very well observed. Alpaca My Bag says we could spoil our votes and write genocide apologists in red pen. Indeed, you're fully entitled to do that. On line 1 is Michael in Cleveland, Ohio, in the United States, on Israel and America. Go ahead, Michael.
Hello, George. I don't want to disagree with you about that America has got the, stronger position. Obviously, it's a superpower and Israel is not. And also, the United States has historically had its own interests. But I'd like to take a slightly different perspective on it in saying that I believe that between the Israel lobby, the Mossad possibly having spies embedded in the United States, and maybe Israel also having assets embedded in the government, in the military, and other places, that Israel kind of has the U.S. Government held hostage. Now, to me, a hostage is something that you find to be valuable, that you're willing to negotiate to not lose. Our politicians value nothing more than wealth, than power, and than status. And as we've seen, AIPAC and the other Israel lobbies have control over, who can stay in power, and if they find a threat, they will run other candidates against them. I mean, John Fetterman's a good example of this. So in the sense that the Israel lobby has the ability to control the future of these politicians who show nothing but disdain for American civilians, right? Our population. These candidates largely are not going to do anything that goes counter to what the Israel lobby and, the powerful people like Sheldon Adelson would want. Again, I don't dispute the fact that the United States it's a superpower and Israel is just a small country. But I just wanted to provide that different perspective on things.
Well, no, there's no disagreement between us, Michael, at all. The United States owns Israel rather than Israel owning the United States, though it often looks to be the other way around. In this sense, he who pays the piper calls the tune. And nothing that Israel is doing could it do if the United States pulled the plug. If it said not another dollar, not another gun, not another bullet, not another missile, bomb or shell, and not another veto in the United Nations. And we're going to join other civilized nations in the world in applying economic, cultural, and other sanctions against you. That would be it. It would be game over. It's true that in order to avoid that, Israel has invested massively, as Miko said earlier, over 100 years in ensuring that the political parties and politicians are purchased one way or another so that that plug will never be pulled. But that doesn't change the fact that the plug could be pulled. If the political will was there, the plug could be pulled. I've told the story before. It's worth retelling. When I was running for mayor of London 8 years ago, I jumped off our campaign bus on either, I think, Edgware Road, maybe up towards the Kilburn Road end. And I literally bumped into, as I jumped off the bus, an elderly man, a Jewish ex-serviceman, with his beret and his medals, a proud man, and rightly so, of the service he had given in the Allied cause against fascism in World War II. And he embraced me. And he told me who he was and where he was going. And he said this: if you had been with us, you would have been in 10 Downing Street, never mind the office of the London mayor. And we shook hands warmly because he knew that I could never have been with them. And I knew that if I had, he might well have been right. Thanks, Michael, for that call. Sharifa Koheali says, I hate to hear children crying because they fell over. And I wonder how those snipers who deliberately shoot a child and hear them scream can live with themselves. I pray they have nightmares forever. Forever and ever, Sharifa, in the nightmare of the hell fires. Sam says Hind is paving the way for liberating the whole world of Zionism. And Misbah Malik says, may Allah grant Hind paradise, inshallah. Russell is on the line in West Virginia on U.S. aid to Israel. Go ahead, Russell.
George, as you were speaking on your show, the U.S. Congress was moving forward on an extraordinary Sunday session to push through another $14 billion in weapons for Israel. The Senate voted to proceed to another vote tomorrow that will support this aid, along with another $70 billion for the Ukraine and the slaughter there. And then it will go to the House, where there's a good chance that it will be defeated. And so I'm encouraging all citizens of the United States to call their members in the House this week and urge them to vote no on what we call the genocide tax, money that should be used in the United States for needs of the American people that's being used to slaughter the Ukrainians and the Palestinian people. And we have, we're pushing through a new newspaper. It's in its infant stages called the Capitol Hill Citizen, to cover Congress closely, because the whole future of the Middle East and the Palestinian people is in the hands of a few members of Congress who, if they stand up and decide not to further fund the genocide in Gaza, most likely there'll be a new direction. And we're very close to getting that done. So I was listening closely to Miko Peled talking about demands. And the demand is here this week in the United States on our members of Congress to reject the genocide tax and to stop this from happening. That's one. The other is the political situation in the United States. many of my liberal democratic friends are now saying something the equivalent of genocide, but. So yes, they agree it's a genocide. As you pointed out, 50% of Democrats and people who support Biden agree it's a genocide, but it's genocide, but. And the but is Trump. So what they're saying is, of course, this is awful. Of course, it's a genocide, but we have no choice. On the front, our cartoonist for the Capital Citizen is a guy named Dwayne Booth, and people can see this, the cartoon that's appearing in our current issue of the Capital Citizen, capitalcitizen.com, where it's Biden in his head in a bunch of skulls, looking through what Mr. Fish, our cartoonist, calls, looking through his support of Israeli aggression for a reason why anybody with a soul might be able to forgive his complicity with genocide and vote for him in 2024. And so I urge my fellow citizens in the United States to call Congress this week, tomorrow, Monday, and urge them to vote against the genocide tax that's going through the Congress this week.
Best call of the night, Russell, in West Virginia. Thank you very much for it. Cleopatra SLL says not one dime to Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan, secure the U.S. southern borders, resolve USA citizens' homelessness. First, provide decent health care to USA citizens. First, overthrow the Biden regime. And Timothy Fay says, and yet I keep hearing excuses from liberals and Democrats that we have to vote for Biden. F that noise. And Jetmir Reka says, we lost many brothers and sisters in Palestine, but we found many wonderful and brave Jewish cousins. Last call then is from Canada, and it is from Ariane. Ariane, welcome to the show.
How are you, George?
By the grace of God, good. Thank you.
Thank you, George. I want to congratulate you. You are doing a spectacular job. There is no other individual on this planet Earth that I can think of that has the consciousness, awareness, and a sense of justice that you display every day on every show. And I've been watching you for over 20 years. You're doing an amazing job. The simple question that exists today, though, you mentioned that you know, this thing about genocide. You also wonderfully talked about ImranKhan. You know, this thing that started both in India, Pakistan, and the Middle East was caused by the British over 100 years ago, and this sort of it begs a question: what kind of world are we emerging in where the legacies of colonialism and the vestiges of it are still around? And what can we as people throughout the world do? I mean, the United States had all the protests against Iraq. People had consciousness, they had awareness, but they were unable to convince their governments. And here we go again through the same thing with genocide in Gaza and, for example, in Pakistan. So what do you think, just as a philosophical question, as someone who's aware at a higher level, what do you think what sort of agenda, what can ordinary people do, or what do you see on the horizon so that we can sort of keep these childish politicians at bay?
Well, thank you, first of all, for your very kind comments. You touched me deeply with them. The hour is late, so I can't do your question justice, really, but I'll try and summarize what I think. We're not called perfidious Albion for nothing. And you're not called a genocidal colonial country for nothing. In Canada, and all the way from Canada to Chile, European colonialists massacred 100 million people and stole the lands that belonged to other people and stole what was under them and took away everything that they could carry. It was an act of brigandage. It was an act of piracy. I was talking to a Bengali audience of children yesterday, And I think I surprised them when I told them that when the British arrived in Bengal, it was the richest place in the world. And when Britain left Bengal, it was the poorest place in the world. And you don't have to be Einstein to work out what happened in between. We stole it all. The might of the British Empire was built on the theft of the resources of other people. As you know, the Egyptians have only got pyramids because they were too big to cart off to the British Museum. The truth is that European colonialism, and you're a part of it in Canada, European colonialism colonized the world. Britain ruled 25% of the world's surface and controlled the lives of 35%, more than 1 in 3 of all the people in the world. Every second day of the year, a country celebrates its independence from Britain. So our empire, then superseded by the American empire, lies together with the French Empire, Spanish Empire, Portuguese Empire, Italian Empire, German Empire, European empires, and their North American offshoots are responsible for the great crimes that have scarred the last 300 or 400 years of human history. The truth is that our people have not shaken themselves free of this colonialist mentality. Some still believe that we had some right to sail the 7 seas and steal other people's countries, steal their wealth, even steal their people, and take them off in chains as slaves in the holds of ships, transported as beasts of burden to work as slaves in the Caribbean and in North America. Some of our people have not lost that mentality. After all, how's that for exceptionalism? You have to be exceptional, don't you, to believe you have the right to do these things? And of course, if you believe you yourself are exceptional, then that by definition means you believe other people are less than you, less exceptional than you. And so the 2 places that you mentioned are British crimes. The reason Kashmir is held today by a foreign power, held in bondage, the reason we are commemorating the martyrdom of Maqbul Butt today in Kashmir and amongst friends of Kashmir around the world is because the British handed over an overwhelmingly Muslim population that wanted to be in Pakistan if the country was to be partitioned, handed it over to the Maharaja in India. The reason Palestine is in crisis is because in 1917, the British Prime Minister, on behalf of one people, promised to a second people the land that belonged to a third people. And thus a bloody staircase, descending staircase to the horrors we have today was constructed and has been embarked upon. So that's why fundamentally I define myself as an anti-imperialist. I hate imperialism, not for any philosophical reason. That's above my pay grade. I left school at 16 and became a factory worker in Michelin tires. But being of Irish extraction, I knew what imperialism meant. It meant going to other people's countries and stealing their things and bullying them until they agreed to hand those things over. And I've always hated thieves, and I've always hated bullies. And these are the basic imperatives of my political life. I'm doing everything I can, everywhere I can, on every platform I can, with all the breath that God still will give me, to hasten the day that the bullies are beaten, that the thieves are put where they should be, and that the wealth of the people should be restored to the people whose wealth it is and distributed equally and fairly amongst them. That's my political philosophy. I didn't need to read any big political books to come to that conclusion. My faith guides me to that conclusion. My conscience, my daily communion with God forces me to choose right over wrong. Everybody knows when they're doing the right thing. Everybody knows equally when they're doing the wrong thing. It's about winning that inner struggle in yourself when tempted to do the wrong thing, to do the right thing instead. And that which is true of an individual is truer still of a nation, truer still of a group of nations. They know that what they do is wrong, and they must change, or we must change them. There's an apology in the air on the newspapers, online, here in Rochdale today. It may be the most abject, the most base, the most demeaning and degrading, and the least sincere apology ever given by any public figure. Me, on the other hand, I have nothing to apologize for. I stand with the Palestinian people. I have done all of my life. I will do until the end of my life. And after me, my 6 children and their children, all of whom were on the streets of Rochdale today with me, rallying for peace and justice in Palestine. So I don't apologize. I'm proud of the stand that I have taken. I had no choice but to take it. My conscience would not have allowed me to do any other. It's been marvelous for me. I hope it was for you. I've enjoyed the show this evening. I hope you did. And if you did, then the good news is I'll be back, God willing, on Wednesday at exactly the same time, 7 p.m. UK time. Why not turn out for the next installment of the mother of all talk shows and bring another viewer with you? Why don't you? Good night.